begins when they begin to believe that there is a conspiracy by a corrupt British government to take away their rights and liberties. Great Britain at the time was ruled by a constitutional monarchy. That meant that they had a king. His power was hereditary, but it was not absolute. With the Glorious Revolution in Great Britain in 1688, Parliament reigned supreme. The King's power was held in check by Parliament, a legislature having two houses, one of which was elected by voters in England. The colonists will bring that idea of a very limited self-government here. So by the eve of the Revolution, these colonies were making their laws largely through elected assemblies, and this building provided a meeting place for Pennsylvanians. What causes the colonists to determine that the only way to keep their rights as British subjects was to no longer be British subjects starts with a war. A war that begins in the backwoods of Pennsylvania in 1754. It is started, ironically, by a 22-year-old Virginia colonel by the name of George Washington. And this will be a showdown between the two superpowers of the world, Great Britain and France, to determine, amongst other things, which of those nations would dominate North America. This turns into a world war. It lasts nearly 9 years. It is fought on 4 different continents. In 1763, Great Britain comes out the winner. With that victory, they have won a tremendous amount of territory from France. And achieving that victory, they have accumulated a tremendous debt. So they are going to rethink not only how the new territory is governed, but the American colonies as well. So now the King and Parliament will begin making laws for the colonies, and for the first time, the colonists are taxed directly. This concerns them because they have no representatives in Parliament, and they see this as a violation of their rights. So beginning with the Stamp Act of 1765 and other acts by the British government to directly tax and control the American colony, in September of 1774, representatives of 12 of the 13 colonies met here in Philadelphia as a political body. Philadelphia at the time was the largest city in North America and a central location to them all. That First Continental Congress, as they called themselves, met down the street at Carpenter's Hall. And they were meeting in response to British legislation that had been passed to punish the colonists for the Boston Tea Party. The First Continental Congress does a number of things. Among them, they sent a petition to the king, which the king ignored. In his eyes, these men were not a legitimate political body. He had made up his mind. He had another name for them. To George III, they were traitors. They agreed that they would no longer import British goods, nor see American materials exported to Great Britain. And of extreme importance, they agreed that they would communicate with one another in order to enforce that. They agreed that they have the right to defend their rights by force of arms. So they agreed to begin military preparations. Lastly, they agreed that they would return to Philadelphia the following year if things did not change for the better. So in the spring of 1775, a Second Continental Congress begins meeting in the main building of the Pennsylvania State House. So, ladies and gentlemen, please gather your belongings and let's go over the Pennsylvania State House. Those rights and liberties that we held dear as American colonists and British subjects, and the change that happened, are both reflected within this room. This room was the Supreme Court for Pennsylvania. It was the highest court in the colony. Most Americans can recognize this as being a courtroom because the American legal system began as a copy of the British legal system. Although we declare independence from Great Britain, we still hang on to everything that we thought was good about Great Britain. Our language, our customs, our system of trade, our legal system, to name a few. Now, there are differences between this room and most American courtrooms today, and the biggest one is right here. We do not use this in the United States anymore. Now, which participant of the legal system do you believe may have been found here? The defendant, the accused, exactly. In the 18th century, when they told you that you were going to stand trial, guess what? They meant that you would literally stand trial and face your accusers. If I were a Pennsylvanian on trial, I imagine I would rather guilty standing here. But as a British subject, I have rights pertaining to the room. And among them, the presumption of innocence until proven guilty by the evidence presented. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to the painting above the judge's bench. That is one of two items original to the building. That painting, the seal of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, is first put up there in 1785, and it is put up there to show Pennsylvania authority within the courtroom. But from the time they began using the building until July 8th of 1776, there was another symbol of authority that hung there, and it looked like this. Now, many of you folks happen to recognize the Royal Coat of Arms. I would like to think it's okay. I would like to believe that we are over it. This has been described as having been a large wooden plaque hanging above the judge's bench to show royal authority within the courtroom. But on July the 8th, shortly after 12 o'clock noon, there was a little gathering out back. A couple of thousand people gathered to hear read aloud to them for the very first time the words to the Declaration of Independence. Some of the audience were so inspired by what they heard that they came into the courtroom, jumped over the judge's bench, and tore down that large symbol. And what do you think they did with it? Well, first they paraded through the streets in a less than regal manner. Then it, along with other symbols of royal authority, are taken to the city's center square, and as you have correctly identified, burned. That tells us a couple of things. First, it shows us the Philadelphia fans have not changed in 233 years. But it is also a very clear signal that they were no longer regarding themselves as subjects of Great Britain. They were beginning to think of themselves as citizens of a new nation. That nation was born in the room across the hall. So let's continue over there. Well, it is supposed to be a bald eagle. However, we can't paint it down because painted cameras on pretty much state of Philadelphia, but clearly never seen a bald eagle. Yeah. Well, there are some days when you look at Pennsylvania, so what's on it? The gold statue represents justice. Folks,